Okay, this is getting a little weird.
Hey, buddy, watch this.
That's right, folks. Everybody wants to buy some TP, and in Battlegrounds, everybody wants to buy Tier 6 minions. That's why we're going to look at some custom Tier 6 cards designed by you guys today. That said, stay safe out there, guys. Don't do crazy stuff. Buy what you need and nothing more. Like, for instance, the gigantic, giant Cube KR made this one. It's a Tier 6 Battlegrounds minion, of course. It's a 25/25 by default, and it reads, this minion can't be buffed. So basically, you get this really quick dump infusion of stats at 25/25 onto your board, but it doesn't scale at all. So I like this idea for a card. I don't know if these numbers are exactly right. I might lower them just a hair so that you prevent a crazy power spike by tiering up too soon. But I like this idea of having a minion that shores up your board, particularly one that can't be synergized. It's not of any given tribe. So you're sacrificing synergies, you're sacrificing scaling just to shore up a weakness or maybe gain a really short-term power spike, but still committing a little bit of your economy to doing that. And it can really help you fill out a build or, make you feel less bad about low rolling certain other elements, which would be really nice to have at Tier 6 in Battlegrounds. So next up here, we have Mages of the Mirror from Viking Chief, a 0/7 with Divine Shield that reads, when this is attacked, summon a copy of the attacking minion. So this to me feels like another way to have a sort of catch-up mechanism. If you've really low-rolled, things have gone terribly, your build's not coming together, you're facing off against that strongest guy in the lobby who's just absolutely hit the nuts, maybe you take a gamble on Mages of the Mirror that it hits the Curator's super buffed Nightmare Amalgam, or, just a big Wrathweaver or a gigantic Cobalt Guardian. Clearly, there are a handful of different high rolls off this that would pay off big time. Now, you are sacrificing a board spot to get this to work, and of course, if it gets attacked when you don't have any board spots available, it won't work at all. So there's a couple risks and problems here, but I like those kind of Hail Mary, last-ditch effort. This is my only chance to succeed. Those kinds of cards are cool to have in a game mode like this where you are subject to a lot of RNG from time to time. So, although this could be really powerful and scary in some ways, if it's like, the worst case scenario happens to the opponent, keep in mind this could also just roll off of like tokens and die to a 7/1 token or something and really not achieve much of anything at all. So I do think it achieves a nice balance there between payoff and risk. Now, if you golden this, I guess you're going to make 2 minions, which might be even crazier, but of course, tripling Tier 6 units, pretty hard to do in the first place, so I'm not too worried about any kind of balance implications of a card like that with, some kind of Khadgar Mages of the Mirror taunt-only board. There are some shenanigans possible, but I think those would still be fine in the average Battlegrounds game. So next up here is the Cold Heart Templar from a mage old as dirt. It's a 4/3 unit, and it reads, start of round, summon a copy of your rightmost minion. So we have another minion here that's about kind of shoring up perhaps some weaknesses or even doubling down on the one unit you've really invested into. So if you have something you care about a ton or you've just buffed this one thing to the high heavens, right? Then you get to make a copy of it at the cost, of course, of running a 4/3, because the 4/3 is clearly not going to be the kind of thing you want in a final board state when you're up near Tier 6. But if you have a bit of a lopsided board, you can even things out a little bit and double up your primary strategy in some fairly interesting ways. This could be another card that has some silly shenanigans with something like Khadgar, where you could have this and a Khadgar and some gigantic minion and summon a couple extra of those as well. So I do like the alternative playstyles that open up with a card like this one. There is still some downside to this, of course, because of the 4/3 body, but beyond that, you do have to put it to the rightmost side of your board, which can sometimes have negative implications if you really wanted to copy like a big cleave minion, for instance. You couldn't do that very effectively putting it at the right side of your board. It might cleave way too late in the game to matter. So all in all, another fun way to kind of take a new look at how boards are assembled and how boards are balanced, which is a pretty nifty design. Next up here, we have the Apex Predator from Nutter666. Perfect for the Tier 6 custom card video. It's a 5/8 beast with a battle cry. Adapt once for every other beast that you control. And I like how this card shifts a beast late game in a different direction. Right now, beasts are all about this kind of setup that happens where you either buff things via that mama bear or pack leader, and you kind of just accumulate these buffs on board, or you set up this like Goldrin Baron Rivendare thing where you do all this, and it's all about what happens during combat, basically chaining tokens, hitting those combat buffs. But I think Apex Predator goes in a little bit of a different direction because it does its scaling in the tavern phase instead of the combat phase. So basically, if it didn't come together perfectly, or you don't have the right set of minions, or you're a little bit too reliant on a mama bear or a pack leader or something, you can start investing into something like Apex Predator instead as this kind of star that goes on top of your build that caps things off. And of course, if you have 6 beasts, adapting 6 times can make Apex Predator a very scary threat. We haven't even talked about that yet, right? Because you can get Divine Shield, you can get Poisonous, you can get Wind Fury, you can get a ton of health, you can get Taunt. You can make this into a hoss all on its own as long as you have beasts, which might even allow some people to make like a late game pivot. Or maybe you just kind of have 2 beasts and you're like, oh man, I'm just going to buy that Alley Cat and hope I can go into a crazy Apex Predator to build into for later. I think there's a lot of different implications there. And, you could get multiple Apex Predators and start scaling that way as well. And if you turn this golden, of course, it's going to adapt twice for every other beast you control, which is absolutely absurd. Might take up your entire turn, but I think that would be super, super fun, if perhaps a little crazy OP. Next up here, we have FAL Ace from Nori. This is a 5/5 demon with a battle cry. Give all friendly demons +2/+2 and repeat for every 10 damage you dealt to yourself this game. So if you start with 40 health and you go down to 1, that would be 39 health removed. Of course, 49 in the case of Patchwork, which means in an average hero, you could give each other friendly demon +6/+6, which is clearly an enormous buff bundled into a single unit. But we haven't seen a lot of these kind of like one-time use battle cry kinds of cards in Battlegrounds yet. We've seen things like Calic Ghost that allow you to chain multiple buffs over multiple turns, but something like this takes a sort of strong shell scavenger vibe, but ups the ante even more, where it can be an enormous buff, particularly synergistic with demons. And I like that this would give demons a way to maybe shift out of Soul Juggler builds in the late game, like Soul Jugglers carry you through the mid game, and then a card like this one comes in and starts shoring up all those like Void Lords and all the other maybe taunt demons you've got along the way, and you can start to move into a taller stat build instead of the sort of machine gun Soul Juggler build instead. And I like having variability in builds and ways to shift in the late game to do different things. A card like this meets that need really nicely, and although I don't really love when demons are great, adding good cards into Battlegrounds is certainly not a problem as long as everything else stays balanced. Moving on here to Bookmaster Bei Chow from Rob K. This is a 4/4 with Death Rattle. Silence your opponent's rightmost minion. And I love cards like this one because I think we need a little bit more counterplay and reactivity in Battlegrounds. Cards like Unstable Ghoul have really gone a long way already to do that, giving everybody a sort of answer to Divine Shield builds in a way. Of course, that can kind of be counterplayed again if they go into cards that really synergize with losing Divine Shields, and there's this nice back and forth. Bookmaster would provide another opportunity to do those sorts of things. If your opponent's really invested into some big buffed stats, or they want to tuck a Soul Juggler onto the right side of the board, you can maybe get that one round surprise where you just silence that Soul Juggler and suddenly it's not going to deal tons of damage, and that's great. And then maybe they're like, oh my god, do I have to get rid of my Soul Juggler? Do I move it farther in the fight? There's all these kind of mind games. Is he going to even keep the Bookmaster? Maybe he's going to sell it next round. And you actually have this strategic back and forth where you can kind of gamble against your opponent and make really calculated decisions. And that's cool. I think that would be great for Battlegrounds. It makes those late game 1v1 situations for the top spot much more strategic in a way, or at the very least gives you options and flexibility. Sometimes they otherwise feel kind of prescribed, like you don't really have any choice in the matter at all. So cards like this one, even if it's not perfectly balanced or exactly right in its wording, although I think it's certainly very close, still serve a cool need in Battlegrounds that I'd like to see met. Next up here, we got Robbie Hood from King Kuba, a 3/3 with Taunt and Battlecry. Give your other non-golden minions +3/+3. And I love, first off, thematically, this card's great. Of course, we all know Robin Hood, taking from the rich to give to the poor. In this case, if you have non-goldens, if you're poor, you're going to get a nice little buff off of Robbie Hood. So it's just a card that has a kind of niche utility and, again, a very nice battle cry. And it's cool that it has taunt as well. So if you do have to, like, finish off a round with this, at least you still gain a little bit of utility out of this body having taunt, which can disrupt things like big Cobalt Guardians and such. So a lot of really cool little attention to detail in this card, thematically and mechanically speaking, but also just a card that does something different and takes a little bit of a new spin on Battlegrounds. Like, okay, let's reward people who haven't hit those triples. That suddenly gives players new angles, new decision points, new strategies, all of which are very welcome to me. Moving on here to the Fel Hunter Elite from B.B. Brilliams. That's a fun name to say. This is a 6/6 with Wind Fury, and it reads, whenever a demon dies, gain +2/+2. So another cool demon follow-up card here that shifts, again, away perhaps from something like a Soul Juggler build into a late-game tall stat build, because you could build this into a really big minion pretty quickly if you're already running all those Void Lords and demon token synergy style cards. So complements allows you to shift into a game plan that maybe your opponent built into tons of giant Annihilant Battle Masters, and it's like, oh my god, my Soul Jugglers are never going to work against this. Well, maybe you move into Fel Hunter Elite and you still have some play, you still have some choices, or maybe it's just a complementary piece to a Soul Juggler build. Maybe you got enough demons anyway, and this just works nicely. So, we've seen these kinds of cards before. This feels like a junk bot, for instance, but just scaled up a little. The Wind Fury adds a new element. So taking something familiar, moving it into a new tribe, upping the ante to make it a tier 6 feel-good unit, and offering a tribal synergy a new way to go. All of those are great card design elements. Moving on here to the Crystalmancer from Faroon, a 4/8 dragon. We got a nice little dragon card here. And it's got a battle cry, destroy a friendly minion, and then Death Rattle, summon a 1/1 copy of it. So a couple new things happening here in this card. First off, activating Death Rattles in the tavern is not something we've seen so far, but is possible with a card like this one where you can destroy something via battle cry. So you could, for instance, have a Gas Coiler on board. You could destroy that Gas Coiler and then get a couple new Death Rattles. Or maybe I don't know why you'd want to do that, but you could. Maybe a better example is a Sneed's Old Shredder. You're like trying to find some cool legendary. You don't really care about your Sneeds. You destroy your Sneeds. You roll into a Myexna or some kind of crazy tier 6 thing that you're super excited to see. Crystalmancer gives you those possibilities. Now, beyond that, there's some cool opportunities here with Crystalmancer where you can hide a legendary or a cool synergistic card of value during a battle. For instance, if you really, really care about your Kangor's Apprentice surviving until the right moment, you could tuck a Kangor's Apprentice inside of your Crystalmancer, and then your Crystalmancer hides it for a while, protects it until your mechs die, for instance. Then your Crystalmancer dies, it summons that Kangor's Apprentice, and boom, you can finally get the value realized off that. Of course, add in a Baron Rivendare and things can scale even better because this has 2 Kangor's Apprentices inside of it, and then those Kangor's Apprentices summon all these mechs, so on and so forth. But I think this just takes things in a different direction here in a couple ways, giving you kind of an egg utility in Battlegrounds, also giving you that Tavern Death Rattle aspect, both of which are very, very cool. And there you go, folks. That wraps it up for this edition of Custom Battlegrounds cards. Some really cool designs here. I think Tier 6 is a very hard spot to design cards for from a power level standpoint. And I will say that certainly a lot of these cards seem higher powered than the Tier 6 cards we know in Battlegrounds right now. Part of that, I think, is that it's been a while since these were submitted, perhaps even prior to the most recent Battlegrounds patch. And we know that in the past, Tier 6 units didn't quite feel good enough. I think they do feel much better nowadays than they used to. So maybe some of these design decisions were made when Tier 6 still didn't feel all that strong. Nowadays, I feel like Tier 6 feels good. These might go a little bit overtuned in many cases, but nonetheless, good, powerful cards are still pretty fun to play. Now, for next time, we're going to up the ante even more. I want you to design for me a Tier 7 Battlegrounds minion. Now, of course, there is no Tier 7 in Battlegrounds right now, but I think there's a cool idea where you could move into a Tier 7 Battlegrounds minion only if you triple a Tier 6 minion. It would basically be like a special unlock that's only available in those cases. Tripling a normal unit on tier 6, in my mind, wouldn't unlock a tier 7. It has to specifically be a tier 6 moving into a triple into a tier 7, which means this needs to be an incredibly powerful minion that's most relevant in the late game. So what would a tier 7 minion under those conditions look like in Battlegrounds? Now, that said, I know that was a lot. I'm going to provide more details in the description, in the submission link down there. Check that for all the full details on exactly how I'm envisioning what this would look like. But beyond that, you know, your imagination is your limit. Go absolutely crazy with these because they could be nuts. That said, thanks much for watching this time around. Thanks for submitting so many cool cards. And until next time, game on.
Step aside.